The morning coffee still steamed in his cup when the alarm started screaming. David Torres had been enjoying the quiet moment before his shift ended, watching the stars drift past through the observation deck of the Stellar Dawn, the luxury liner carried families heading to Titan for vacation, business travelers, and young couples starting new lives in the colonies. It was supposed to be the safest route in human space. The ship shuddered as something massive appeared on their starboard side, then another on port, then 3 more directly ahead. The alien vessels looked like predators made of metal and hate. Their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack a planet. Torres ran to the bridge as passengers began screaming in the corridors. His crew was already at their stations, faces pale but determined. The communications officer looked up with wide eyes. "Captain, we're being hailed. They're demanding to speak with whoever's in charge." Torres straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a creature that belonged in nightmares. The alien had scales like black glass, eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness, and teeth that curved like daggers. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Commander Vorth of the Hegemony Coalition. You will listen carefully, human. Your species has expanded beyond acceptable limits. You have colonized worlds without permission. You have built fleets without oversight. This ends now?" Torres felt his blood turn to ice, but he kept his voice steady. "This is Captain Torres. Of the passenger liner Stellar Dawn, we're carrying civilians. Whatever dispute you have with Earth, these people have nothing to do with it." Vorth's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "On the contrary, Captain, they have everything to do with it. These humans represent your species' future. Without them, you have no reason to expand. Without expansion, you remain contained." The alien leaned forward, and Torres could see the calculated cruelty in those yellow eyes. "Here are your options. Earth will immediately cease all expansion beyond your solar system. You will submit to hegemony oversight of your military. You will accept our guidance in all matters of interstellar policy. Or we will execute every human on this ship, one by one, until your government agrees." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Torres looked at his crew, seeing the same thought in every face. These weren't soldiers or politicians. These were ordinary people who just wanted to reach their destination safely. "You can't be serious," Torres said. "These are innocent civilians, families with children, elderly couples. They've done nothing wrong." Vorth's laugh was like breaking glass. "Your species values individual life over collective wisdom. This makes you weak. We have studied your history, Captain. You always negotiate when lives are at stake. You always surrender when faced with the deaths of innocents. It is your greatest weakness." Before Torres could respond, the alien ships began deploying boarding pods. The Stellar Dawn's hull rang like a bell as the attackers cut through the outer plating. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the ship's defenses tried and failed to stop the intrusion. "All passengers report to the main cargo bay immediately," Torres announced over the intercom. "This is not a drill. Move quickly and stay calm." But calm was impossible as alien soldiers poured through the corridors. They moved with brutal efficiency, herding terrified humans like livestock. The creatures wore armor that seemed to absorb light, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Torres watched helplessly as families were separated, children crying for their parents, elderly passengers struggling to keep up. The aliens showed no mercy, no compassion, no recognition that these were living beings with hopes and dreams. In the cargo bay, 847 humans huddled together in terror. Vorth appeared on the ship's screens, his image towering over them like a dark god. "Humans of Earth," he announced, "you are now prisoners of the Hegemony Coalition. Your lives depend entirely on your government's cooperation. If they agree to our terms, you will live. If they refuse, you will die. The choice is theirs." A little girl started crying, and her mother pulled her close. An old man sat heavily on a cargo crate, his face gray with exhaustion. A young couple Held hands so tightly their knuckles were white, Torres felt rage building in his chest. These aliens thought they understood humanity. They thought humans were weak because they cared about innocent lives. They thought compassion was a flaw to be exploited. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Captain," his communications officer whispered. "Earth Command is requesting a private channel." Torres nodded and moved to a secure station. The face that appeared on the screen was Admiral Price, the head of Earth's Defense Council. But something was different about her expression. There was no panic, no desperate negotiation. Instead, she looked calm, almost coldly determined. "Captain Torres," she said quietly, "I need you to listen very carefully. How many civilians are aboard your ship?" 847, Admiral. All accounted for. "Good. Are you and your crew prepared to follow Emergency Protocol 7? Torres blinked. Protocol 7 was theoretical, something they'd trained for but never expected to use. It was the plan for when negotiations weren't an option. "Yes, Admiral, we're ready." "Then prepare your people, Captain, and tell them this." Price's eyes hardened to steel. "We don't negotiate with kidnappers. We don't bargain with terrorists. We don't make deals with those who threaten our families. We simply remove the threat." The transmission ended, leaving Torres staring at a blank screen. Around him, the alien soldiers continued their patrol, confident in their superiority. They had no idea that their message to Earth had just triggered something they couldn't possibly understand. The humans weren't going to beg. They weren't going to plead. They weren't going to surrender. They were going to fight back with everything they had. And the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their compassion. It was their absolute refusal to let anyone hurt their own. The emergency session of the Global Defense Council took place in a room deep beneath Geneva, where the most powerful leaders of humanity gathered in times of crisis. Representatives from every major nation sat around a circular table, their faces grim as they watched the alien transmission play for the third time. Admiral Price stood at the head of the table, her hands clasped behind her back. She had served in 3 wars and faced down pirates, terrorists, and rogue nations. But this was different. This was a threat to the very survival of human civilization. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur of worried conversations, "we have a situation. 847 civilian hostages aboard the Stellar Dawn. The aliens are demanding complete surrender of our expansion rights and submission to their authority." The French representative leaned forward. "Admiral, surely we must consider their demands. Those are innocent people." "With respect, Minister, that's exactly what they're counting on." Price activated a holographic display showing the alien fleet. The Hegemony Coalition has used this tactic before. They study a species' psychology, find their weakness, and exploit it. They believe our compassion makes us weak. The Chinese delegate frowned. "Are you suggesting we abandon our citizens?" "I'm suggesting we show these aliens what happens when they threaten our families." Price's eyes hardened. "We have 72 hours according to their ultimatum. I propose we use that time to demonstrate something they clearly don't understand about humanity." The room fell silent. These were people who had spent their careers in diplomacy, negotiation, and careful political maneuvering. What Price was suggesting went against every instinct they had. The American Secretary of Defense spoke up. "Admiral, what exactly are you proposing?" Price smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "I'm proposing we teach the galaxy that humans don't negotiate with kidnappers. We don't pay ransoms. We don't make deals with terrorists. We simply eliminate the threat." She gestured to the holographic display, and it shifted to show the current positions of human vessels throughout the solar system. "For the past 5 years, we've been implementing the Merchant Marine Defense Initiative. Every cargo ship, every mining vessel, every transport in human space has been equipped with military-grade weapons and shields. To outside observers, they look like civilian craft. In reality, they're our hidden fleet." The British Prime Minister stared at the display. "Are you saying our entire merchant marine is actually a military force?" I'm saying the Hegemony Coalition has just surrounded themselves with the most advanced warships in human history, and they have no idea. Price's finger traced the positions of the disguised vessels. They think they're watching panicked civilians running for safety. What they're actually seeing is a coordinated military deployment that's been in motion since the moment they made their threat. The Russian representative raised an eyebrow. This was planned? Not specifically, but we've always known this day would come. Humanity has been expanding too fast for the established galactic powers. They were bound to try something like this. Eventually, Price brought up another display showing communication intercepts. Our intelligence services have been monitoring hegemony transmissions for months. They've been planning this operation, studying our psychological profiles, convinced they understand how humans think. The Brazilian delegate shook his head. They're not entirely wrong, Admiral. We do value individual life. We do try to save our people. Absolutely, Price agreed. But they've made a fundamental error in their calculations. They think compassion equals weakness. They think caring about civilians means we'll surrender to protect them. What they don't understand is that our protective instincts don't make us weak. They make us absolutely ruthless when someone threatens our own. She activated another holographic display, this one showing the deployment of additional forces. Fleet Command has been quietly repositioning our forces for the past 6 months. Every major system has at least one task force within jump range. The aliens think they're facing a scattered, desperate species. What they're actually facing is a coordinated military response that's been planned down to the minute. The Japanese representative looked troubled. But Admiral, if we attack, won't they kill the hostages? That's the beauty of this operation, Price replied. They won't have time. Our intelligence indicates the alien fleet is designed for intimidation, not actual combat. They've built their entire strategy around the assumption that humans will fold under pressure. They've never faced a species that turns hostage situations into military operations. The Indian delegate leaned back in his chair. You're talking about a complete reversal of how the galaxy conducts diplomacy. I'm talking about teaching the galaxy that humans don't follow their rules. Price's voice carried absolute conviction. Every species they've encountered negotiates when their people are threatened. Every species tries to minimize casualties. Every species puts individual lives above strategic objectives. We're about to show them what happens when they threaten a species that considers hostage-taking an act of war. The room was quiet for a long moment. These were the people who would make the decision that could change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Finally, the American Secretary of Defense spoke. Admiral, what's your assessment of our chances? Complete success, Price replied without hesitation. The aliens have made every mistake possible. They've underestimated our capabilities, misunderstood our psychology, and positioned themselves exactly where we want them. In 72 hours, the Hegemony Coalition will learn that humans don't negotiate with kidnappers. The vote was unanimous. Price activated the secure communication system that would carry her message to every corner of human space. Military commanders, intelligence operatives, and civilian leaders would all receive the same simple order. 2. All human forces, she began. Operation Protective Custody is now active. The aliens holding our people have 72 hours to surrender and release the hostages. This is not a negotiation. This is not a plea. This is a statement of fact. She paused, looking directly into the camera. And to the Hegemony Coalition forces monitoring this transmission. You wanted to test human resolve. You wanted to see if we would sacrifice our principles to save our people. Congratulations. You're about to learn that our principles don't make us weak. They make us absolutely unforgiving when someone threatens our families. The transmission ended, leaving the alien interceptors with a message they couldn't quite understand. They had expected begging. They had expected negotiation. They had expected surrender. What they got was a promise of war. The countdown timer on Commander Vorth's command screen showed exactly 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. The human deadline had passed, and there had been no surrender, no desperate plea for mercy, no agreement to hegemony terms. The aliens had monitored human communications and found nothing but silence. Vorth stood before the main display in his command center, his yellow eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Around him, his bridge crew prepared for the demonstration that would break human resistance once and for all. "Bring the first human to the execution chamber," he ordered. "We will broadcast this across all human networks. Once they see what defiance costs, they will beg for terms." The tactical officer looked up from his console. "Commander, our sensors are detecting unusual movement in the human merchant vessels. They appear to be changing course." Vorth barely glanced at the readings. Panic and confusion. Typical human behavior when faced with superior force. They flee like scattered insects, but something nagged at him. The movement patterns weren't random. The human ships were repositioning in what almost looked like a coordinated formation. That was impossible, of course. Humans were emotional creatures driven by fear and individual survival instincts. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human passenger liner. Put it through." The screen flickered to show a human face. Not the captain they had spoken to before, but a woman with hard eyes and graying hair. She wore what appeared to be a simple civilian outfit, but there was something about her posture that suggested military training. "This is Admiral Price of the Earth Defense Council," she said calmly. "I'm here to inform you that you're 72. Hours are up. You have one final opportunity to surrender and release the hostages unharmed." Vorth laughed, a sound like breaking metal. "Admiral, you humans and your meaningless titles? You are in no position to make demands. Watch as we demonstrate." The cost of defiance. The woman on the screen didn't flinch. "Commander Vorth, you've made several critical errors in your assessment of human behavior. You assume we negotiate with terrorists. You assume we prioritize individual lives over strategic objectives. You assume our compassion makes us weak. Your assumptions are correct, human. Your species values individual life above all else. It is your greatest weakness." "No," Price replied, her voice as cold as space. "It's our greatest strength. Because when someone threatens our families, we don't negotiate, we don't compromise, we don't show mercy. We simply remove the threat." Before Vorth could respond, alarms began screaming throughout his ship. The tactical officer spun around in his chair, his face pale with shock. "Commander, the human merchant vessels are not merchant vessels. They're warships, all of them. They're powering weapons and locking targeting systems." Vorth stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The scattered, panicked human ships were revealing themselves as military vessels. Advanced ones. More advanced than anything in the hegemony fleet. "Impossible," he breathed. "Our intelligence showed civilian cargo ships, mining vessels, passenger transports." "Your intelligence showed what we wanted it to show," Price replied. "From the screen. Every human vessel in this system is a military asset. Every captain is a trained naval officer. Every crew member is a veteran. What you thought was a civilian population is actually the most advanced fleet in the galaxy." The first hegemony ship died in a flash of coherent light. The escort cruiser simply vanished, its hull turned to expanding plasma by weapons that shouldn't have existed. "Return fire!" Vorth screamed, but his gunners were already trying. The hegemony weapons, designed for intimidation rather than actual combat, barely scratched the human shields. A second ship died, then a third. The human vessels moved with impossible coordination, their attacks timed to the microsecond. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. "How?" Vorth demanded, staring at the tactical display as his fleet was systematically destroyed. "How did you hide an entire military force?" "We didn't hide it," Price replied. "We disguised it." For 5 years, every human vessel in space has been a warship pretending to be civilian. Every mining operation has been a military base. Every trade route has been a patrol corridor. What you thought was a peaceful expansion was actually the largest military buildup in galactic history. The bridge shook as near misses from human weapons overloaded the ship's shields. Vorth realized with growing horror that his flagship was the only vessel left in his fleet. "The hostages," he said desperately. "If you attack us, they will die." "No, they won't." Price's smile was the most terrifying thing Vorth had ever seen. "Because you're not fighting civilians, Commander, you're fighting soldiers." The ships? Internal alarms began screaming as something cut through the hull. Boarding pods, but not like any the hegemony had ever seen. These were silent, precise, designed for surgical strikes rather than brute force. "Impossible," Vorth said again. "We scanned the passengers. They were civilians, families, children, elderly." "Some of them were," Price agreed. "But quite a few were off-duty military personnel, intelligence operatives, and Marines traveling in civilian clothes. Did you really think we'd send our people into space without protection?" The blast doors to the bridge exploded inward, and human soldiers poured through. They moved with deadly efficiency, their weapons trained on every alien in the room. At their head was a man in the uniform of a ship's captain, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a special forces operative. "I'm Captain Torres," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him, "and I'm here to collect my passengers." Vorth raised his weapon, but a human soldier was faster. The energy beam struck the alien commander in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the deck. "Surrender, and you'll be treated according to interstellar law," Torres announced. "Resist, and you'll be terminated. Your choice." The remaining aliens on the bridge dropped their weapons. They had seen what happened to their fleet, seen how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered and outfought. "This is impossible," Vorth gasped from the floor. "You're civilians." "You don't have military experience." Torres knelt beside the wounded alien, his expression devoid of sympathy. "Commander, you made the mistake of thinking humans separate their military from their civilian populations." "We don't. Every human is a potential soldier. Every civilian is a potential warrior. Every family is a potential military unit." He stood and activated his communicator. "This is Torres. The passenger liner is secure. All hostages are safe. The alien fleet has been neutralized." Price's voice came through the channel, as calm as if she were discussing the weather. "Excellent work, Captain. Now comes the educational portion of our program." Vorth looked up in confusion. "Educational portion?" Oh. "Yes," Torres replied. "You see, Commander, we could have simply rescued our people and called it a day. But that would have left the impression that humans are reactive rather than proactive. We prefer to be proactive." On the main screen, Vorth could see human fleets emerging from jump space throughout the system. Not just the disguised merchant vessels, but actual military fleets. Battleships, carriers, and vessels of designs he had never seen before. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "We're teaching the galaxy a lesson," Torres replied. "About what happens when someone threatens human civilians. About what happens when someone thinks they can intimidate us. About what happens when someone makes the mistake of thinking humans negotiate with kidnappers." The last thing Vorth saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the sight of human battle fleets, jumping toward hegemony space, carrying a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humans didn't negotiate with terrorists. They eliminated them. The Hegemony Council chamber on Nexus Station had never seen such panic. Representatives from 12 different species huddled around the central holographic display, watching in horror as human fleets systematically dismantled their carefully constructed empire. Council leader Thress, a being whose species had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, stared at the tactical reports with disbelief. In just 6 hours, the humans had rescued their hostages, destroyed an entire hegemony fleet, and launched simultaneous attacks on 47 different systems. "This is impossible," muttered Counselor Zelt, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. "The humans are a young species. They lack the experience for coordinated military operations on this scale." "They lack the experience for losing," corrected Counselor Vane, whose insectoid features twitched with nervous energy. "Commander Vorth's ship managed to escape. The reports are concerning." The main display showed the current status of hegemony forces throughout the sector. Red markers indicated systems under attack, yellow showed those under threat, and the precious few green markers represented intact installations. The humans were moving with a precision that suggested months of planning. How did they hide this capability? Thress demanded. Our intelligence networks are the finest in the galaxy. We've been monitoring human expansion for decades. The answer came from an unexpected source. A small, furry creature in the corner of the chamber cleared its throat. Counselor Pip had been quiet throughout the emergency session, but now all eyes turned to the representative of the Kryn Collective. With respect, Council Leader, Pip said in his soft voice, I tried to warn you about this 3 years ago. The humans were not expanding randomly. They were following a pattern. Every colony, every outpost, every trade route was positioned for maximum strategic advantage. You said they were driven by profit and exploration? Zelt accused. I said they claimed to be driven by profit and exploration, Pip corrected, but their actions suggested otherwise. They were building a military infrastructure while pretending to be peaceful traders. Thress activated a communication channel. Commander Vorth, report your status. The screen flickered to show the interior of a hegemony medical facility. Vorth lay in a regeneration tank, his injuries from the human assault slowly healing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute defeat. Council Leader, we have lost everything. The humans didn't just rescue their hostages. They turned it into a military operation. Every human vessel in the system was a disguised warship. Every passenger on their transport was a potential soldier. We were not fighting civilians. We were fighting a military force that had been waiting for us to make exactly this mistake. The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. If the humans had been preparing for this kind of scenario, what else had they been preparing for? What are their current actions? Thress asked. Vorth's image shifted to show a tactical display. They are systematically attacking every hegemony installation in the sector, but they're not acting like conquerors. Before each attack, they broadcast a message giving us time to evacuate all non-military personnel. They're not trying to maximize casualties, they're trying to maximize humiliation. Humiliation? They're demonstrating that we are helpless against them. They could destroy us completely, but instead they're showing restraint. It's worse than defeat, Council Leader. It's a lesson in how inadequate we are. Councilor Zelt leaned forward. What about their losses? Surely they've taken casualties. None, Vorth replied flatly. 0 human casualties. They've rescued all their hostages, destroyed our fleet, and captured 3 of our installations without losing a single soldier. They're not just defeating us. They're making it look effortless. The display shifted to show intercepted human communications. Admiral Price appeared on the screen, her expression calm and professional as she addressed her forces. All units, this is Admiral Price. Phase 1 of Operation Protective Custody is complete. All hostages have been recovered safely. We are now proceeding to Phase 2. Remember, we are not conquerors. We are teachers. Every action we take sends a message to the galaxy about what happens when someone threatens human civilians. The transmission continued with operational details, but the Council had heard enough. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were conducting an educational campaign designed to teach the galaxy about human capabilities and resolve. They're not trying to destroy us, Pip observed quietly. They're trying to make an example of us. They want every species in the galaxy to understand that humans don't negotiate with kidnappers. Thress felt a chill run through his ancient body. What do you mean? Think about it from their perspective, Pip continued. They could have negotiated for their hostages. They could have made concessions to secure their people's safety. Instead, they turned it into a military operation. They're sending a message that threatening human civilians is not a negotiating tactic. It's a declaration of war. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the galaxy had operated under certain unwritten rules. Hostage-taking was a legitimate diplomatic tool. Threats against civilians were acceptable ways to pressure governments. The humans had just declared those rules null and void. "Sir," called out a technician monitoring the communication channels, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting to speak with the Hegemony Council." Thress straightened in his chair. "Put them through." The screen flickered to show Admiral Price, but she was no longer on a starship bridge. She was in what appeared to be a government office, surrounded by the flags of human nations. Behind her stood military officers, diplomatic representatives, and civilian leaders. "Council Leader Thress," she began, her voice carrying across the vast distance between them. "I am Admiral Price of the Earth Defense Council. I'm here to discuss the current situation." "Admiral," Thress replied, trying to project authority despite the circumstances. "The Hegemony Council is prepared to negotiate terms for ending this conflict." "Council Leader, I think you misunderstood the purpose of this communication. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to explain the new reality." Price gestured to the display behind her, which showed the current tactical situation. "Your forces have been neutralized in 47 systems. Your fleet strength has been reduced by 60%. Your ability to project power beyond your core worlds has been eliminated. This is not a negotiation. This is a lesson." "What lesson?" Thress demanded. "That humans don't negotiate with kidnappers. That threatening our civilians is not a diplomatic tool. That anyone who tries to use our compassion against us will discover that compassion and ruthlessness are not opposites. They are complementary aspects of a species that protects its own." The chamber was silent except for the hum of machinery. Finally, Thress spoke. "What are your terms?" "Simple," Price replied. "Complete cessation of hostage-taking by any hegemony species. Reparations for the psychological trauma inflicted on our civilians. Recognition of humanity's right to unrestricted expansion. And most importantly, acknowledgement that future hostage situations involving humans will be treated as acts of war." "And, if we refuse?" Price's smile was cold as the void between stars. "Then we'll continue teaching until the lesson is learned. We have time, Council Leader. We have patience. And we have the firepower to make our point as clearly as necessary." The transmission ended, leaving the Council staring at a blank screen. The silence stretched for long minutes before Pip spoke again. "Council Leader, I recommend we accept their terms." "We cannot simply surrender to these upstart humans," Zelt protested. "We already have," Pip replied sadly. "We just haven't admitted it yet. The humans have demonstrated that our entire philosophy of galactic governance is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be strong." Thress looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. They were beings who had ruled the galaxy through intimidation and careful manipulation of weaker species. But the humans had just proved that their methods were useless against a species that refused to be intimidated. "Very well," he said finally. "Contact the human fleet. Tell them we accept their terms." The Great Hegemony Council, rulers of the galaxy for 3 millennia, had just learned that some species don't negotiate. With kidnappers, they removed the threat instead. The signing ceremony took place aboard the human diplomatic vessel Earth's Promise, a ship that looked peaceful but carried enough firepower to level a moon. Representatives from every major galactic power had gathered to witness what historians would later call the Treaty of New Principles. Ambassador Reed stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included beings from hundreds of different worlds. Some had come as allies, others as neutral observers, and a few as former enemies, learning to navigate a galaxy where the rules had suddenly changed. 6 months ago, Reed began, the Hegemony Coalition made a decision that changed the course of galactic history. They chose to threaten human civilians as a negotiating tactic. They believed that our compassion was a weakness to be exploited. The audience was silent, remembering the reports of the swift and decisive human response. The Hegemony fleet had been neutralized in hours. Their military installations had fallen in days. Their government had surrendered in weeks. Today we gather to formalize the new understanding that has emerged from that conflict. Not just between humanity and the hegemony, but between humanity and the galaxy as a whole. Reed gestured to the massive document displayed on the central holographic projector. The Treaty of New Principles was surprisingly brief for such a significant agreement, but its implications were vast. The core principle is simple, Reed continued. Humans do not negotiate with kidnappers. We do not pay ransoms. We do not make concessions to those who threaten innocent lives. We remove the threat. In the audience, Council Leader Thress sat with the other hegemony representatives. The once proud leader of the Galactic Coalition looked older now, his confidence shattered by the realization that his species had been living in a bubble of their own making. This is not about human superiority, Reed emphasized. This is about establishing clear boundaries. Any species that threatens human civilians will face immediate military response. Any organization that takes human hostages will be treated as a terrorist group. Any government that uses human lives as bargaining chips will find itself at war with all of humanity. The treaty itself was being signed in order of galactic seniority. The ancient Kryn collective was first, with Counselor Pip applying his species biosignature to the document. As the smallest and most peaceful member of the galactic community, the Kryn had been among the first to understand the humans' message. We welcome this new paradigm, Pip said as he signed. The galaxy has operated under the assumption that might makes right for too long. Perhaps it's time we learned that compassion and strength are not opposites. The Altarian Republic signed. Next, followed by the Centauri Federation, the Vegan Trade Alliance, and dozens of other governments. Each signature represented a recognition that the galaxy's power structure had fundamentally changed when the hegemony's turn came. Thress approached the podium with visible reluctance. The document he was about to sign would formally end his species' dominance over galactic affairs. The Hegemony Council, he said slowly, acknowledges the validity of human diplomatic doctrine. We agree to the immediate cessation of hostage-taking as a negotiating tactic. We accept the payment of reparations for psychological trauma inflicted on human civilians. We recognize humanity's right to unrestricted expansion. He paused, looking directly at Ambassador Reed. And we formally acknowledge that future hostage situations involving humans will be treated as acts of war. The signature process continued for hours, but the real ceremony was taking place in the communications networks connecting every world in the galaxy. News of the treaty was spreading faster than light itself, carried by quantum entanglement. Transmitters to every corner of known space, on trade stations, alien merchants were already updating their protocols for dealing with human customers. On military bases, defense planners were revising their threat assessments. On diplomatic outposts, ambassadors were rewriting their instructions for contact with human representatives. The galaxy was learning that humanity had introduced a new variable into the equation of interstellar relations. It wasn't enough to be strong anymore. It wasn't enough to be clever. Species that wanted to deal with humans had to be honorable. There is one more aspect of this treaty that deserves special attention, Reed said as the ceremony neared its end. The protection clause? The holographic display shifted to show a specific section of the document. Any species that adheres to the principles outlined in this treaty will be entitled to human protection against hostage-taking by other parties. We are not just establishing rules for our own benefit. We are offering to extend our protection to any civilization that shares our values. The implications were staggering. Humanity was essentially offering to become the galaxy's police force against hostage-taking and terrorism. Any species that signed the treaty could call upon human military support if their civilians were threatened, several smaller species in. The audience exchanged glances. For centuries, they had been victims of larger powers who used their citizens as pawns in political games. Now, they were being offered protection by a species that had just demonstrated the ability to defeat the galaxy's strongest military coalition. This protection is not conditional on trade agreements, military alliances, or political alignment, Reed continued. It is based solely on a shared commitment to the principle that civilian lives are not negotiating tools. The hegemony representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were realizing that humanity hadn't just defeated them militarily. They had outmaneuvered them diplomatically, turning a conflict into an opportunity to reshape galactic civilization. As the final signatures were applied to the treaty, Reed addressed the audience one last time. This document represents more than an agreement between governments. It represents a fundamental shift in how civilized species interact with each other. She gestured to the humans in the audience, many of them families who had been aboard the Stellar Dawn during the hostage crisis. These are the people the hegemony thought they could use as bargaining chips. Ordinary citizens going about their daily lives. The hegemony believed that threatening them would make humanity weak and compliant. Reed's voice hardened. Instead, they discovered that threatening human civilians is the fastest way to face the full military might of our species. This is not a weakness. This is our strength. We protect our own, and now we're extending that protection to anyone who shares our values. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for those who had suffered under the old system of galactic diplomacy. Then the representatives began filing out, each carrying with them the knowledge that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. In the weeks that followed, the effects of the treaty became apparent throughout known space. Pirate groups that had preyed on civilian shipping found themselves facing human patrol fleets. Terrorist organizations discovered that their usual tactics would bring swift and merciless retaliation. Governments that had relied on intimidation found their power bases crumbling. The most dramatic change came in the frontier regions, where smaller species had long lived in fear of their more powerful neighbors. Within a month of the treaty signing, 3 different civilizations had requested human protection against aggressive neighbors. In each case, the mere presence of a human diplomatic vessel had been enough to resolve the crisis peacefully. On Earth, Admiral Price stood in her office overlooking the Geneva headquarters of the Global Defense Council. The wall display showed the current deployment of human forces throughout the galaxy. What had once been a defensive posture had become something unprecedented in galactic history. "Admiral," her aide reported, "we're receiving another request for protection. The Tau Ceti colonies are reporting threats from a species called the Korthic Dominion." "Deploy a diplomatic squadron," Price ordered. "Make sure they understand our position on civilian targeting." The aide nodded and left to carry out the orders. Price returned to studying the display, thinking about how much had changed since the Stellar Dawn incident. Humanity had gone from being a minor player in galactic politics to being the enforcer of a new moral order. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message from Ambassador Reed. "Admiral, I thought you'd want to know. The latest intelligence reports show that hostage-taking incidents galaxy-wide have dropped by 97% since the treaty signing." Price smiled. "And the remaining 3%? Species that haven't gotten the message yet, but they will." The human doctrine was spreading throughout the galaxy like a wave of change. Species that had never considered the moral implications of their actions were suddenly forced to confront the reality that some civilizations refused to accept the old rules. On distant worlds, alien leaders were updating their military doctrines, diplomatic protocols, and intelligence assessments. A new line had appeared in every threat analysis prepared by every government in the galaxy. Under no circumstances should human civilians be taken hostage. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their military prowess, or their economic power. It was their absolute refusal to compromise when it came to protecting innocent lives. And in the deepest regions of space, where new civilizations were just beginning to reach for the stars, the story of the Stellar Dawn incident was becoming legend. It was the tale of a species that turned their compassion into a weapon, their empathy into armor, and their love for their own people into an unbreakable code of conduct. The message was simple, clear, and absolute. Humans don't negotiate with kidnappers. They remove the threat instead. The galaxy had learned this lesson well, and it would never forget it. In the vast tapestry of interstellar civilization, humanity had woven a new thread of moral certainty. And anyone who tried to pull that thread would discover that it was made of steel. The age of hostage diplomacy was over. The age of human principles had begun,